which is on the legal regulation of circuses. And we're very pleased to have two speakers with us today. Catherine Doyle, who is campaign director of In Defense of Animals. She's director of the Elephant Campaign in particular. She's been an animal welfare professional for more than 13 years, with the last 9 years devoted exclusively to elephants. Her elephant advocacy work began with efforts to rescue Ruby at the Los Angeles Zoo, eventually resulting in her transfer to the Paws Sanctuary in 2007. She's a recipient of the City of Angels Animal Humanitarian Award and a member of the selection committee for the prestigious Genesis Awards. We also have Catherine Meyer, who is an attorney with Meyer, Glitzenstein, and Crystal. She's a founding partner of that firm. She specializes in administrative, environmental, wildlife, animal, public health, and Freedom of Information Act law. She has represented many national and grassroots environmental, animal welfare, consumer protection, and public health organizations, as well as authors, journalists, and historians. She is known for finding innovative ways to advance her clients' interests. Examples include bringing an emergency case to stop the burning of endangered sea turtles in the Gulf of Mexico, establishing standing for individuals challenging the treatment of captive wildlife, and establishing standards that apply to an agency search for records under FOIA. So please join me in welcoming our last two speakers.
Hi everyone, it's the end of the day here. They saved the best for last, that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to get to that, right? So anyway, yes, my name's Catherine Doyle. I'm the Elephant Campaign Director with In Defense of Animals. And I'm going to talk about circuses. IDA is an international animal protection organization located in San Rafael, California, and is dedicated to protecting the rights, welfare, and habitat of animals through education, outreach, and hands-on rescue efforts. We have sanctuaries in Mumbai, India, Cameroon, Africa, and rural Mississippi. So the issues that we're going to be covering today are listed here. And really, this is about society re-examining its treatment of non-human animals, and circuses really have become a focal issue due to the unnatural and inhumane conditions that are inextricably linked with the transient nature of the business and the limited ability to improve those conditions. And I think while many emphasize the abusive practices associated with circuses, which I am going to be talking about, such as negative reinforcement training, use of the bullhook, physical violence, it's really important to think about the day-to-day realities of the lives of these non-human animals in circuses that are ongoing and even lifelong for them. And these include long periods of travel, intensive confinement, and physical and social deprivation. Wild species found in circuses, there's both wild and domesticated species found in circuses, but we're talking about Asian and African elephants, lions, tigers, reptiles, kangaroos, monkeys, giraffes, pygmy hippos, and zebras. Domestic species include dogs, horses, and ponies. The primary purpose of displaying wild animals in circuses is entertainment. Circuses offer no real education or conservation value. Instead, what they really do is trivialize endangered species, such as tigers and Asian elephants, and send the wrong message about how we should care for the Earth's endangered species by turning them into objects of frivolous entertainment. But now the question I'm going to be bringing up here is, you're going to hear a lot about the conditions these animals are kept in, but is this abuse? Is this abusive? And I'm also going to be referring later to a recent lawsuit regarding the Los Angeles Zoo and its elephant exhibit that's going to fold back into this. So I want you to keep this idea of abuse in your minds, because the issue that I believe we have with circuses is that the legal requirements for abuse really are no longer in line with societal norms or even just common sense. What I want you to think about is your own definition of abuse and about what conditions you think would be necessary to prove abuse in a court of law and how you would litigate it. Also, what we do when it is the conditions in which non-human animals are kept that are causing physical and psychological suffering, physical and mental disorders, and premature death. In the case of elephants in circuses, we know that in fact the very tricks that they do cause irreparable damage to their bodies, causing damage to their feet and to their joints, So do we just write this off as an occupational hazard for an individual who did not voluntarily take on this occupation? And if you think it's hard to prove physical abuse, you should also think about psychological abuse and its effect in non-human animals and how that's proven. And that was actually, I was a plaintiff. I've been involved in 2 lawsuits now. I'm not an attorney, but I was a plaintiff in a lawsuit regarding 2 elephants that were being separated after 17 years. We're at the Los Angeles Zoo, and that was my first venture into the animal law area. And also the lawsuit that I'm going to talk about later on about the LA Zoo elephant exhibit. That had to do with conditions for the elephants there. And actually, and it came down to really the judge's decision came down to whether or not the way the elephants were being kept was abuse. Back to circuses. So as you can see, this is an elephant being unloaded from a transport car, rail car. And in circuses, wild animals, they're constantly on the move, which really creates these insurmountable compromises or challenges to welfare. The animals are subjected to the stress of forced movement, human handling, noise, unloading and unloading, restraint, intensive confinement. And they're going to spend long hours standing in their own urine and feces and often be deprived of food and water. Performance schedules can last 48 to 50 weeks a year as circuses are crisscrossing the country, meaning that these animals are going to be spending the vast majority of their time in train cars, in trucks, and in small pens. And this includes not just during travel, but also before and after performances, and even during performances, they're really only going to be out for the very short amount of time that they have to perform. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus's own documentation, shows that elephants can travel 26 hours straight on average, with some legs as long as 70 hours without a break, and the longest being 100 hours. And during that time, well, you probably remember this better than I do. It's like 200 pounds of feces, I think, and 15 gallons of urine that are going to make their way beneath their feet. And in fact, when stops were made, they would open up the doors, and the stench was described as unbearable. And what they would do is just replenish food and water, but they wouldn't let the elephants off. So that's how. Let me see. Let me make sure. Okay. Oops. Almost to chaining. Studies of circuses in the U.S. and abroad have found also, I'm going to talk about, besides elephants, big cats spend about between 75 and 99% of their time in cramped cages, and under the extremely minimal requirements of the Federal Animal Welfare Act, 2 to 3 adult tigers can be held in a cage pretty much no bigger than a conference room table. So, if you, well, we don't have one in here to really compare, but and of course, performances and training make up a very small part of the animal's activities, as little as 1 to 9% of the day. So therefore, you can't really give any credence to the claim that activities that are provided, actually do provide adequate exercise or somehow compensate for this unnatural lifestyle. So chaining is the most common method that's used. Oh, yes, you had a chance to read the Bizarro comic here. It's the most common method used to confine elephants in circuses. It virtually immobilizes them. They can only take a few steps in either direction. And though elephants are naturally adapted to continuous movement over long distances, they normally in the wild would be on the move for 20 out of 24 hours a day. The severity of these restrictions can result in neurotic repetitive behaviors like rocking and swaying, pacing, also in physical problems such as lameness, foot abscesses, and arthritis. Transportation orders, we kind of covered that. Transportation orders for Ringling again showed how long that, not only when I talked about animals being kept transported in train cars, that elephants in particular then would be on chains that entire time. So you're talking sometimes as long as 100 hours being continuously chained and restricted. So the prolonged chaining of elephants does not occur only while they're on the road, of course. The practice also continues during the off-season. So according to court testimony at Ringling's breeding facility in Florida, elephants are kept chained for about 16 hours a day, sometimes as long as 22.5 hours. And as this is an intrinsic part of the management of elephants in circuses, it's something that really can't be changed or improved. There's also stress of performance. For some of the animals in circuses, the tricks that they do actually harm them. For elephants, they're made to do what are called power moves, which is sitting up, standing on their back legs, doing, mounting, they stand like one on the back of the, their legs on the rear of the elephant before them. And these repeated movements are actually associated with swelling of the joints and other premature wear and tear of the joints, tendons and muscles of the leg, Excessive pressure placed on the diaphragm during sitting can cause hernias, which can lead to death. And performance, and also, let me back up here. And there are other actually issues related with performances as well, which is it can cause, other than elephants, of course, talking about other animals, it can cause severe stress to these animals, such as loud noises are a known stressor, and tigers may develop gastroenteritis as a result of persistent loud noise. And repetitive behaviors, both for tigers and elephants, increase in the hour leading up to performance, and when the animals are on public display, which is an indicator of stress. Prolonged stress, of course, as you know, with humans, we know the effect of stress on our immune systems. It's the same for non-human animals. So in these animals, it does affect their immune function, reproduction, metabolism, and behavior. And of course, these can't be stimulated, again, due to the nature of traveling circuses. It's something that's just, you know, it's part of the lifestyle. So this picture shows, actually this is in the UK, it's a training, this was an undercover video of an elephant named Mary, and as you can see that this trainer is getting ready, he's using a baseball bat swing to hit this elephant who is chained and, you know, can't get away. This elephant actually is a young elephant with the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus at their complex in Florida. And there they take calves away from their mothers at, when they're very, you know, under a year of age. And even though in the wild, female elephants would naturally stay with their mothers for life. And the males would stay with their mothers until about their teen years. But instead at the circuses, they're removed from their mothers at a very young age and subjected to a regimen that includes being bound with ropes, chained and jabbed, struck with a bull hook. And what this does is break the elephant and allows for complete control. So, but again, coming back to this kind of theme of abuse here, is that really, you know, the circus sees this as standard training. What I think any normal person, you know, would see this as abuse. And this is something that, you know, that we would not tolerate seeing in, let's say, in domestic animals, in our own, in a dog, you know, for example, it would never be tolerated. And, but again, this is the issue of abuse. The circus sees it as standard, you know, procedure, standard training, and they don't, it's not considered to them to be abuse. Animals are forced to perform the tricks, of course, through negative reinforcement training, physical fear, physical violence, fear, intimidation, withholding of food and or water. Trainers use whips and bullhooks, muzzles, electric shock devices. They often resort to screaming, punching, kicking, and beating animals. And lions, tigers, and other large cats are clubbed, jabbed with metal poles to ensure compliance. The real training of wild animals for circuses goes on behind the scenes, has been seen in many, many, many videos, and again, of course, showing that this isn't just, you know, this isn't a scenario of just one bad apple. This is something that goes on over and over again. And I don't know what videos you're going to be showing, but I'm assuming it's probably at least something that'll include that. Sorry, I don't have videos today. But unlike domestic species, wild animals have not been bred for compliance and companionship with humans over thousands of years. Therefore, their wild instincts and nature are in constant conflict with this captive environment and their captors and their treatment. The reason, I should go back one. I want to talk a little bit about the bull hook. There was something I think was mentioned kind of in the outline for the, you know, the program today. This is the most commonly used device, as you can see on the top there. It's basically, it looks like a fireplace poker. It has a steel tip and hook at the end. It's used to hook, jab, prod, stab at, you know, strike the elephants. And it's about 2 to 3 feet long. It's heavy, it hurts, and it is designed to hurt elephants. It's designed for them to feel it, basically. Elephants' skin, people think, you know, that elephants wouldn't feel it. Basically, their skin is so tough that it would take something like this just for them to kind of feel it, and that's absolutely not true. Their skin, they can actually feel the bite of an insect, and they have areas of their skin, areas of the body where the skin is paper thin, such as around the mouth, and it's areas where they would be hooked. The bull hook, of course, is usually embedded in soft tissue behind the ears, inside the ear or mouth, in and around the anus, and in tender spots under the chin and around the feet. In circuses, elephants are routinely struck with bull hooks during training and before performances. And there's an infamous video of a training session with the Carson Barnes Circus where the trainer tells others that you have to do this behind the scenes. In fact, he said you have to hit them, you have to make them scream, because that's when they're going to really listen to you. and that you can't do this when you're performing in front of 1,000 people. So you have to do it there in the barn. In other words, you have to have complete control of these animals, and that's how it's achieved. Records for Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus received their discovery during the lawsuit that Kathy's going to be talking about, showed that elephants suffered multiple abrasions and lacerations from bull hooks, and one memo talked about an elephant dripping blood all over the floor after the show because of being hooked. Elephants are, this is okay. Circuses claim that the bull hook is really akin to a leash for a dog. That's one of their favorite things to say. And I think it's a concept that anyone who owns a dog, of course, would find laughable. And that is, of course, unless you're using a sharp stick to poke and jab at your dog while you're walking down the street to remind your dog that you're the person in charge. I wanted to show this slide because this is something that you have to look at the elephant's eyes on the trainer. In fact, this happens to be the same trainer. It's also the man who told, he was training other men and saying that you had to hit the elephant so hard you had to make her scream. It's the same person. He's working. This is with Cole Brothers Circus. But anyway, it's really, you have to look at the elephants the way, their eyes, the way they look at that trainer. And that's because they know they cannot miss a cue. They cannot miss a cue because they know what the consequences, and that's why the bull hook is effective, is because at some point they learn that if you don't follow through with a command, there's a consequence, and it's a painful one. So for these elephants, they have to be constantly, like I said, they're constantly watching because they cannot miss, any little movement on the part of the trainer. In fact, the top one, that's not even a performance. That was at a photo shoot. And in the rest of the photo, I cropped in, but the rest of the photo, he's just talking to another guy. He's talking to the photographer. And the elephant is watching him like that because she knows she can't miss anything. And there's this great quote from David. And I think this is really true, that I would say it's not the physical hurt because I think it's a combination. It's a physical hurt, but really it is the mental punishment that elephants go through and that they continually go through. And this is lifelong for them. It starts when they're babies and it doesn't end until they die. So, unnatural social conditions. In circuses, well, of course, elephants are highly social. One of the most social of the terrestrial species, and terrestrial mammals, excuse me. And but yet in circuses, elephants live in large family groups, huge. How do I word it? Extended. They live in large extended families, basically, in which they are familiar with, and they know hundreds of other elephants. But yet in circuses, you frequently house singly, or they're in groups smaller than the average in the wild, or in unnatural groupings, or even in mixed species. Elephants are kept separately chained, so they're unable to interact normally, and some circuses travel with a solitary elephant. Of course, chaining and the intensive confinement prevents the establishment of normal social dynamics, which can have negative consequences on welfare and behavior. And then conversely, normally solitary animals like tigers are made to live in groups. In Los Angeles, a couple of years ago, there was a tiger who was kept in a truck overnight with, a whole group of tigers were kept together, and one of the tigers was killed by the other tigers. So, one of the other consequences of this intense confinement, treatment, unnatural lifestyle, lack of free movement, inability to perform natural behaviors is abnormal behaviors. And that's usually, it's called stereotypic behavior, and it's normally what you see is swaying and rocking in elephants, pacing in big cats. And these are associated with a suboptimal environment, deprivation, and poor welfare. And these are all considered to be signs of psychological distress. Stereotypic behaviors are not seen in wild animals. Two more little sections here, and then we're going to get back to talking about abuse. There is a public safety aspect, of course, to circuses, they do pose a threat to public safety because they bring people into dangerously close proximity with these animals, especially with elephants, who are already highly stressed. And they do escape. I mean, in fact, we have the one picture on top is the zebra escape. That was Ringling Brothers. The one below is an elephant escape that was in Ireland. And though they do happen in the U.S. here. And with elephants in particular, I mean, really, the barriers are usually just a very low, inadequate, it's just a useless fence, basically. And of course, elephants are used to give rides, and The majority of the elephants that you're going to see in circuses actually were taken from the wild. There aren't that many that are on the road who were captive born. So, and even if they're captive born, I actually think they're more of a problem. In fact, those are the elephants that are often transported in trucks rather than walk through the cities. Because I know I was told one time that even in Asia, that it was always preferred to capture a wild elephant than to breed, because the wild elephants were were more afraid of the humans, basically, and that the captive-born elephants didn't have that fear. So, and I think that's what we're seeing in circus as well. It's my theory, anyway. So we have seen elephants, tigers, and zebras who have escaped their handlers. Since 1990, there's been 15 human deaths and 135 injuries in the U.S. that have been attributed to elephants, and most of those in circus-related incidents. And there have been 9 escapes since 2000, year 2000 alone. And with big cats, there's been 22 incidents, including 15 injuries, 1 death, and 6 escapes. And then a major issue, of course, is tuberculosis in elephants. And about 12% of Asian elephants, which is a species that's primarily used in circuses, and about 2% of African elephants are believed to carry tuberculosis. And it is a contagious disease that can be transmitted to humans. In fact, elephants don't naturally have tuberculosis. They got it from humans. So they can give it to other elephants, they can give it to us. And most infected elephants never show clinical signs of the disease. This year, Maine barred the Piccadilly Circus from bringing an elephant into the state based on a positive test for tuberculosis antibodies. And Wisconsin barred an elephant who also tested positive for antibodies and was scheduled to give rides at a Renaissance fair. An elephant owned by Carson and Barnes was barred from public contact at Circus World in Wisconsin due to a positive test result for tuberculosis antibodies. And circuses, unfortunately, are opposing updated and improved guidelines for the detection and prevention of tuberculosis in elephants. And the reason they're opposing it is because it could affect the movement of elephants, because it would be far more stringent than even the guidelines they have now. And unfortunately, enforcement is lacking for animals in circuses. All traveling circuses using elephants have to have a USDA exhibitor's license pursuant to the Animal Welfare Act, and they are subject to periodic inspections. The AWA, the Animal Welfare Act, mandates minimal standards of animal care in the areas of housing, handling, sanitation, nutrition, water, veterinary services, and protections from extreme weather. No agency, including the USDA, monitors the animal training sessions in which most of the severe abuse occurs, as we've seen over and over again in undercover videos. And even if the now sporadic inspections were increased, use of the bullhook is not illegal under the Animal Welfare Act, and the provisions of the Act are so minimal that practices like intensive confinement and prolonged chaining are not considered to be non-compliances. Again, we get back to this idea of what is, with standard practice and really what constitutes abuse. So even when USDA finally does file a formal complaint against an exhibitor, the exhibitor usually enters into a settlement agreement and receives usually a reduced fine. By settling, the exhibitor has admitted no wrongdoing. And with the exception of guidelines for monitoring TB in elephants, the AWA contains no language to specifically address the special care, exceptional physical and psychological needs, and the humane handling of elephants and other animals used in the circus. So, which is going to bring us back finally to this question of abuse. In 2005, a lawsuit was filed against the City of LA by attorney David Castleman. And it was regarding the LA Zoo's $42 million brand new elephant exhibit. And it was based on issues of concern. Well, there are a few different allegations in there, but I'm going to focus on the abuse aspect. So first time around in court, and I worked as part of the legal team on this. So I've been working for this in the past 5 years. So first we lost, but then we appealed, and we won the appeal. But what was interesting about the appeal, which unfortunately is unpublished, is that in the appeal it was stated that we conclude that abusive behavior may include the physical characteristics of the enclosure in which elephants are kept. Whether keeping an elephant in any particular enclosure rises to the level of abusive behavior is of necessity a factually intensive inquiry that depends on the particularities of each case. So we went back to court again, and this time we won. It took, when was it? That was, 2009 that we won the appeal. And then this year we finally won the case. And though the judge did stop short of ordering the elephants removed from the zoo, He did order the zoo actually, and I think it's pretty, I've never heard of a judge before ordering a zoo to take particular husbandry or management actions for their elephants. The zoo has to walk the elephants or exercise them a certain amount of, for about 2 hours each day. They have to rototill the soil so it's soft, because it was found that the soil there, even in the brand new exhibit, is very hard and damaging to their feet. And he also, there's an injunction so that the zoo cannot use bull hooks. And even though they claim they don't use bull hooks, now the judge felt it was necessary to include that, because he did not trust that as soon as this lawsuit was over, that they were just going to go back and start using bull hooks again. But, and that was Judge Siegel, Superior Court Judge Siegel, who read his decision really, I'm going to read a little bit from his decision, really rested heavily on the issue of abuse. And of course, you know, we felt that, well, you'll see some of the things he said, and we still think it, well, in fact, the city of LA it's the city runs the zoo, so the city of LA has appealed the decision, so we're going to be back in court again. And we feel we still have an exceptional case actually for proving abuse of those elephants. The judge said that the plaintiff have met the burden of proof that the $42 million Elephants of Asia exhibit is injuring, he used the word injuring, the elephants, specifically their feet, but he contended that this was not abusive. Foot disease, and of course we know that foot disease in elephants is one of the leading reasons for euthanizing elephants in captivity, and it causes years, sometimes decades of pain and suffering. He cited the fact that the zoo had not, quote, subjected the elephants to needless or inflicted unnecessary cruelty on the elephants, though he did find that bull hooks were an appropriate discipline along with electric shock and other practices. He called the lives of the elephants, quote, empty, purposeless, boring, and occasionally painful, and he wrote that they're hardly, as defendants contended, thriving. He even found that the elephants were not getting he said they were not getting proper care and attention, but still he stated, quote, the zoo's conduct is not abusive, does not amount to causing suffering, and is not cruel beyond the ordinary circumstances of captivity. So this raises important questions for those of us who are seeking, to improve the lives of non-human animals through public policy and law. And for me, the questions it raised were, well, how can we make progress for animals used in circuses and other forms of entertainment when abuse may be considered to be just part of the job, or it's part of like this ordinary, circumstances. I also started looking at, in California, our state definition included words, the definition of cruelty, included words like overdrives, overloads, overworks. The word beaten was preceded by the word cruelly, as if there's uncruel beating somehow, right? So this all suggests, of course, to me this just really sounded archaic. It sounded like, this is talking about, I don't know, like driving oxen in the fields or something. That this was all very much suggested that non-human animals not only are to be used for human purposes, of course they're property under the law, but also that non-human, animals in circuses are working animals, and that they're treated differently than, say, our non-human animal companions. And so then I started to think, well, maybe we need to look at changes to the legal definition of abuse. So, of course, the next question being, how do we change the law so that we can bring it more into line with the current science as well? Because certainly we have, especially on, say, elephants, for example, we know so much more now than we did like 30 or 40 years ago, or much less maybe when these abuse statutes were written or and defined. So, and under for even federally under the Animal Welfare Act, there's no provisions for exceptional needs, such as with elephants. We know these highly social species who suffer when they're kept alone, who do need to move, who they suffer both physically and psychologically when they're confined and when they're chained for 26, 70, 100 hours at a time. And yet there's no provision at all for these exceptional needs. So how do we change the law so we can bring it into line with more of the current science? And how can we bring law and policy into line with changing societal norms that tell us that hitting an elephant with a bull hook is wrong? Keeping 3 tigers in a small transfer cage is just wrong. And of course, the larger issue to this is the use of animals for our own entertainment. Judge Siegel actually wrote that. The case, the LA Zoo case, raises the question of whether the recreational or perhaps educational needs of one intelligent mammal species outweighs the physical and emotional, if not survival needs of another. Existing California law does not answer that question. The question is whether defendants engage in behavior that is abusive to the elephants by keeping them in their current captive environment. And he found, of course, that the plaintiff did not meet the burden of proof on this point. And beyond this, though, the bigger issue is that of non-human animals as legal property, which I know that law students are very much aware of. And then the even bigger issue to that is, that personhood, that one day we will have legal personhood for a non-human animal. It will happen, and that's, to me, that's going to cause us just, a tsunami of change for animals, I hope. So, a couple other things. What's my time like? I didn't track. Sorry. Okay. Only a few more things. Just real quick, the good news is that there is a changing regulatory environment. Ringling Brothers, I hope you're probably going to say this right. We're going to cross over a bit here. I think.
Basically covered my entire
talk.
No. That's okay.
I was going to say we should just done it
sure
together
as
as a
tag
team and go back and forth.
Sure.
Anyway, well, I won't say. You can
That's
talk.
okay.
You can
Go.
talk about their about the fine. I won't talk about that. You can talk about that. Okay, did you mention Mother Jones?
Yes.
Oh dear. Okay, I won't
I think
mention
it's in your
that.
packets. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. All right. So I'm not going to talk about that then. I will say at least 34 local jurisdictions have taken legislative steps toward restricting the use of wild animals in circuses, and the number is growing. There's legislation to prohibit the use of wild animals in circuses in other countries as well. There we go. Around the world, we have countries like, that's being discussed in like the UK, Brazil, Netherlands. However, I think I showed here, the countries that have passed the bans, as you can see on the slide here. The local level, actually, in Los Angeles, we're currently considering an ordinance that would restrict circuses, and we're just kind of determining exactly how far that's going to go right now. And but Los Angeles, by far, would be the largest city to date to enact such legislation. Right now, the largest city is only about 320,000 people. Let's see. Oh, this is the fun part. Okay, I do think it's important to know who your opposition is to any prohibitions concerning, and this is specific to elephants, since that's what I've been dealing with. The circus industry opposes, of course, any prohibitions. Surprise, right? On the use of elephants in circuses. But there are other entities that you should know about that you would think would be helping to protect elephants, and they are not. This includes zoos and groups like the International Elephant Foundation and the Elephant Managers Association. Now, both of those groups have zoos and circuses as their members. And so, I mean, that's, I guess, you can cut them a little slack there. But again, I mean, these are groups that are claiming to have like the elephant's best interest in mind. And yet they do not take a stand against the use of elephants in circuses. There are even some animal protection groups that have come out. I mean, I've been there, I've seen them, I've heard them talk. In fact, I think Karen's gone, right? I'm sorry, but the American Humane Association has not been a friend to any legislation for elephants, and because, including bullhook bans. And that's because people who use elephants on film shoots use bullhooks. They're in free contact with those elephants. So AHA has not been our friend on this. Mike Keel, who's the deputy director of the Oregon Zoo, was a paid expert witness on the Ringling Brothers case that Kathy's going to be speaking about. I'm going to talk about that. Though I want to say in zoos, though, it is even divisive within zoos, even though I think it's a certain level of management or of the AZA that is, I would say, vocal about it. But in my personal experience, and I know elephant keepers, I have friends who work in zoos, a lot of them, and a lot of them oppose the use of elephants in circuses. And in fact, the AZA has a policy statement against the use of great apes in entertainment. And if you took out the words great apes and replaced it with elephants, it would read almost exactly the same. But yet they have not taken any steps to do that. There is no progress at all whatsoever by zoos toward any kind of policy like that for elephants. And one of the issues is bullhooks, because about half of zoos are still using what's called free contact. They share the same physical space with the elephants, and they use bullhooks. So that is part of the issue. However, there is a new policy by the AZA that would move zoos toward protected contact management, which means you would have a barrier between the keepers and the elephants at all times, and in which case you don't need a bullhook. Though I recently heard someone from a zoo say, oh no, you can use a bullhook even in protected contact. And the question is, why would you? You don't need to. That's the whole point. It's better for the elephant. It's safer for the keeper. Keepers don't get killed when you're handling elephants in protected contact. But yet we have zoos that are resisting even this policy that is a positive policy, by the AZA. Zoos are also standing with circuses and resisting improved guidelines for the testing of tuberculosis in elephants. In fact, through whatever combined forces, they have been able to hold up guidelines that were actually approved and sent to the USDA in 2010 and still have not been passed. In fact, they're supposed to be published to the Federal Register. That's been over a year, almost 2 years now, and it still has not happened, and it needs to happen. So I suggest that public pressure is needed to influence zoos to take a stand for elephants and circuses used in entertainment at a minimum. So real quick, I'll just rush through this. Our approach to circuses is pretty simple. We work with activists around the country who gather firsthand information. Based on this information, if we find a violation of the Animal Welfare Act, we'll file a complaint with the USDA. We also work with grassroots activists to organize and support circus demonstrations. I guess if they were organized, we'd work with them. We also mobilize supporters to write to government agencies on behalf of elephants and circuses. And some of our campaigns have generated literally like tens of thousands of messages to the USDA, and that was especially in the case of Tina, Jewel, and Queenie, and pressured government agencies to at least pay attention to and take action on these specific cases. And we have had some good outcomes, which is we've been able to put abusive circus trainers out of business. Our work has led to fines and formal charges against other elephant trainers and circuses. And real quick, I don't need to go through all these, but Doug Terranova, his elephants two of his elephants escaped from a circus. One of the elephants was hit by an SUV. And the USDA filed formal charges against him, as well as for some issues concerning tigers. He was fined $25,000. He can never own, handle, or exhibit an elephant again. We initiated an investigation by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that led to a $160,000 penalty against the Cold Weather Circus and trainer Will Davenport for the illegal sale of Asian elephants. And their circus was later fined another $15,000 by the USDA for violations of the Animal Welfare Act. We also were able to get three elephants removed from Will Davenport, who was neglecting the elephants and abusive. One of the elephants had lost an astonishing amount of weight. And so the government did take two of those elephants, and the third one, unfortunately, was sent to a zoo. And then last of all, our complaint led to the confiscation of an elephant named Ned, who was the elephant you see in the picture here, who was extremely emaciated and was still being made to perform. And he became the second elephant ever to be confiscated by the USDA. He was sent to the elephant sanctuary, and unfortunately, the damage to his body was too great, and he only lasted a matter of months after that. But basically, times are changing. Human-only circuses, of course, are becoming increasingly popular. Cirque du Soleil. They've grown from one show in 1990 to 19 shows performing in 271 cities. The highly regarded Circus Vargas is animal-free, entirely animal-free, and they're finding great success. They're actually performing in Los Angeles right now. The LA Times, a major media outlet, actually printed an editorial against the use of elephants in circuses. And this year, a coalition of 15 California humane societies urged a boycott of the Ringling Brothers Circus based on issues of abuse and the conditions in which these animals are forced to live. And in contrast, the Piccadilly Circus, which uses wild animals, had to cancel shows across Southern California last year due to poor ticket sales. We've also seen the number of people increasing, the numbers of people resisting circuses increasing, and it's more common now to see protests of 100 people at a circus, at the opening night of a circus. In Los Angeles, we've had as many as 500 people at opening night of the Ringling Brothers Circus. So finally, getting down to it here. Future circuses using wild animals. I think the writing's on the wall for circuses, and in fact, I was saying about what Gary was saying earlier, and about incremental steps. And I mean, I think this is a case where we are going to see, we will see wild animals, at least wild animals. I'm not going to say all animals, but at least wild animals out of circuses. And I think it's going to happen soon. Especially elephants will go first, and it'll be for a couple of different reasons. But certainly the legislation that's popping up in smaller areas around the country, in these smaller cities, they're just going to start getting. And then once you know, if we can pass something in LA, then I think you know, it certainly becomes more difficult, at least for the smaller circuses, to perform. You know, usually we talk about Ringling Brothers Circus, but there's a lot of other smaller circuses that actually, you know, that have elephants that I've seen are in terrible condition, lame elephants, and I think more attention needs to be put on those animals, especially, you know, like I said, the elephants who are lame and suffering. I'm personally a big fan of the El Capone approach to dealing with circuses, and by that I mean, I don't mean what some people, I'm from Chicago, I can say this, okay? Not what some people would think. I'm talking about the way he was put in jail, okay? And of course, you know, they didn't get him for, you know, everything that he did throughout the years, right? What they got him on was income tax evasion. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to say is that a lot of these circuses, they're working on cash. They're doing elephant rides at $5 a pop. They're, you can buy, you know, food to feed the elephant as the elephant's walking around, you know, $3 or $4. And it's all cash. So I would love to see someone take that on, because I think, to tell the truth, especially on some of these smaller circuses, if there was any kind of action, I think pretty much a lot of them are really financially probably pretty close to the, you know, to the edge. It's, you know, they're not Ringling Brothers, let's put it that way. And I think that any kind of pressure would help to convince them maybe not to work with animals. So anyway, here's my final thought, which is, of course, there's no evidence to suggest that the natural needs of non-domesticated animals can be met through the living conditions and husbandry offered by circuses. Neither natural environment nor much natural behavior can be recreated in circuses, and that's why animals should not be used in circuses. Thank you.
Thank you. I need my assistant. Here he comes now. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm one of those lawyers that Gary Francione thinks is wasting my time. I've been doing these cases for many, many years, and we win some, we lose some. We win some big ones, we lose some big ones. That's going to be my segue to this case. But I think that everything Catherine just said is really important, and if you really care about these animals, and I do, and I'm sure you guys do, you feel compelled to bring these cases. You feel compelled to at least give it a try. And if you don't win that particular case, you're moving the ball forward a little bit. You're exposing the dastardly practices. You are educating the public about what's going on. You're making people ask questions. You're driving the movement. And I think that Catherine's absolutely right that someday, and it's not a question of if, it's only a question of when, and the sooner the better as far as I'm concerned, you won't be seeing wild animals in circuses. It's going to end, and future generations are going to look back at this and say, what, that was crazy. That made no sense. I can't believe they did that. Just in the way that disabled people used to be exhibited in circuses by Ringling Brothers for money. That's considered very, politically wrong, politically incorrect, unethical, immoral, etc. Same is going to be true with respect to the treatment of animals. And so all of these activities that we do, and again, sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, but it all goes towards getting to that point. And we're speaking for the animals, so they need spokespersons, and that's our job. So I don't usually go to conferences and talk about cases that I lost. I like to go to conferences and talk about cases that I won. But given the name of this conference and given the importance of this case, I thought, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And so that's the case we brought against Ringling Brothers. And just a little background, I mean, for years, animal groups have been coming to our law firm. We do a lot of wildlife protection, wildlife litigation, and environmental law. And groups have been coming to us and been complaining about the treatment of elephants. They've been able to see a lot of it out in the public because, particularly with respect to the Ringling Brothers Circus, the elephants were brought through the town
on trains. There was a public unloading of the trains, and then the elephants were walked to a particular venue. And so they were able to capture some of the practices they were complaining about on videotape. And the main species that's used in the circus are Asian elephants. Asian elephants, for whatever reason, they're more malleable, apparently, a bit more maybe intelligent than African elephants. I don't know if that's, Will back me up on that. But they seem to be the elephant of choice for circuses. In the wild, of course, they're very social animals, they're very intelligent animals, they're family-oriented, they walk many, many miles every day. They're extremely, extremely smart and curious and full of life. And in the circus, it's a different story. And so we were brought evidence of some of these public unloadings that I talked about. Here's an example of what had been, oops. Shoot. All right, what did I do? Oh, click it twice? Where's my guy? Click it twice, you said.
No, click it once.
It went to the next slide. What am I clicking the wrong side?
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. Hold on. I thought you said to click this twice. Here's the bullhook. Boom. Here's the bullhook. Get down. So that's a real tiny little snippet of what our clients brought to us as examples of how the bullhook was used. Catherine showed you some bullhooks. These are photographs of the bullhooks that Ringling Brothers uses that were actually taken at ordered inspections that we were able to get, both at a venue where the circus was being held and then at their breeding facility called the Center for Elephant Conservation. So you can see the one that's used in the performances. It's covered in black tape, so to minimize how scary it looks to the public. Ringling Brothers' own employees admitted to that under oath during the trial, and then these are the longer ones that are used at the breeding farm. The second thing that main practice that was complained about was chaining the elephants, which Catherine also talked about. This is actually a kind of a beautiful picture of elephants chained on a picket line, but you can see the elephant's leg chained. They're chained at least on two legs, each of them. They can't move very much in one way or the other, and they're chained like that pretty much most of their lives. I think we had the same picture, Catherine. That's the picture of a picket line. That's kind of what's called a typical picket line. The elephants are chained. Very little movement. So the question sort of was, you know, what can you do about this problem? And we kind of looked around, we looked at the law, tried to figure out is there a way to end this practice through a lawsuit. And the first angle that came to mind was the Animal Welfare Act. I mean, that is the statute that governs the use of animals used in entertainment. All animals used in entertainment. The problem with that statute, it has two big problems as far as I'm concerned. Number one is it doesn't have a citizen suit provision. It has no private right of action. So the only way that statute can be enforced is if the USDA, which has jurisdiction under that statute, brings an enforcement action. And that leads to the second big problem. The USDA historically does not enforce the Animal Welfare Act. It certainly doesn't enforce it to protect animals used in circuses. Its own Inspector General has issued several reports about the lack of enforcement by this agency. So basically, you've got a statute, it sort of looks good on the books, but if it's not enforced by the agency that can enforce it, it's pretty much meaningless. And our clients were able to show that time after time after time, a complaint would be filed by a group like IDA. A complaint is filed. The low-level investigators investigate the complaint and find that there are violations, rampant violations of the Animal Welfare Act, and they issue these beautiful investigative reports that lay out all the evidence and explain exactly which standard is being violated. And then that report goes up the line to the policymakers, to the decision makers at the agency, and time again, they simply decide not to take any action, not to exercise their enforcement discretion, for whatever reasons. Problem with that is there's a well-established Supreme Court precedent, Heckler versus Cheney, which was issued in 1985 by the U.S. Supreme Court, that says you cannot bring a lawsuit challenging an agency's exercise of its enforcement discretion. So even though there were a slew of lawsuits that were tried in the mid-80s and 90s to bring these cases, they never succeed because of Heckler versus Cheney. You cannot bring a lawsuit challenging an agency's failure to enforce the statute because those enforcement decisions are left to the discretion of the agency. So bringing a lawsuit under the Animal Welfare Act wasn't going to work. The next statute that occurred to us is the Endangered Species Act. And the reason the ESA came to mind is that it is a statute that covers any listed species, a species that's been listed as either endangered or threatened under the statute, is to have the protections of that statute. And the ESA, unlike the Animal Welfare Act, has a citizen supervision. Any person who can show that they are sufficiently injured by an allegedly unlawful act taken under that, in violation of that statute, can bring to wait for the agency, the Fish and Wildlife Service, to bring that lawsuit. Any citizen can bring that lawsuit. And the ESA seemed like a good idea because it has a prohibition. Oh, there was another. It has a prohibition against what is called the take of any listed species. And the term take is defined broadly to include harassing, harming, wounding, and even killing the species. And here we had a situation where we had bull hooks being used to wound, to injure, to harm, and to harass these animals. At least 2 elephants had died when we brought the lawsuit through the use of the bull hook. Others died as the lawsuit was progressing. The definition of harm, which is further defined by the Fish and Wildlife Service, is an act which actually kills or injures wildlife. Such act may include significant habitat modification or degradation, where it actually kills or injures wildlife by significantly impairing essential behavior patterns, including breeding, feeding, or sheltering. So we thought we had a pretty good case that the use of the bull hook, the use of chains on these elephants was harming them and was wounding them and was harassing them. There's a definition of harass by the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is too wordy to put on a slide because it has lots of caveats, not surprisingly. But harass is defined to mean an intentional or negligent act or omission which creates the likelihood of injury to wildlife by annoying it to such an extent as to significantly disrupt normal behavioral patterns, which include but are not limited to breeding, feeding, or shelter. The definition goes on to say, when applied to captive wildlife, the definition of harass does not include generally accepted animal husbandry practices that meet or exceed Animal Welfare Act standards, breeding procedures, or provisions of veterinary care. But be that as it may, even with those restrictions, we thought we had really good evidence that these practices were harming, wounding, and harassing these elephants. So we decided to take advantage of the broad citizen suit provision, which the Supreme Court, in a case called Bennett versus Speer in 1997, was an extremely broad citizen suit provision that would allow the bringing of any case against any alleged violator of the statute. We decided to go ahead and rely on that and bring this case. So those were the claims. The claims were that Ringley Brothers, by hitting, beating elephants with bull hooks and keeping them on chains for many hours every day, was violating the take prohibition of the Endangered Species Act. For our plaintiffs in the case, and this becomes important because we ended up losing on standing only, not on the merits of the case, we had a former Ringley Brothers employee named Tom Ryder. Here's a picture of Tom. He's actually wearing an elephant t-shirt. Tom had worked at the circus, at the Ringling Brothers Circus for 2.5 years, and he was very upset about the way the elephants were treated. He saw them hit with bull hooks, saw them kept on chains. He saw other things that were very disturbing, and he had left the circus and he wanted to help the elephants. So he was one of our plaintiffs in the case, and the allegation of his Article 3 standing was that he had been aesthetically injured by seeing the mistreatment of the animals, the elephants, and by having to make the choice between either going back to visit them at the circus and continuing to be harmed by what he saw aesthetically, or he would have to avoid seeing them altogether when he had grown to love them. So those were the standing claims we made for him. Just so you get a little bit of idea of Tom, because he became a huge reason for why we lost this case on standing, I brought a clip to show you of him. This is him doing an interview. What am I doing wrong here? What did you do that I'm not doing? You said
Just hover
click
over
it.
the slide and click when you're on the slide.
Go over here, click?
No.
No, on your
Just with my finger?
monitor.
With the
Yeah, just
cursor.
take the mouse to the slide and click it once. There you go.
Oh, the mouse wasn't on there. That's why.
Now, Tom Ryder
Thank
used
you.
to work for Ringling Brothers and Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus. He joins us tonight. What did you see when you worked for Ringling Brothers and you worked with the elephants?
Oh, I worked there for 2.5 years. I was the barn man in the afternoon from 3:30 to 10:30, and my basic was to take care of the elephants and feed them. And what I seen was a systematic pattern of beating, overly hooking with a bull hook, and if they wouldn't do their commands or they were very slow in the performance, they'd be brought back to tent, chain, and literally beat about the head, the trunks. As you saw in the video on the back of the foot, that gets them moving faster.
So there's Tom Ryder. In addition to Tom, we had 4 animal protection groups, the ASPCA, the Animal Welfare Institute, Fund for Animals, and the Animal Protection Institute, now Born Free. And they had allegations of injury as well for Article 3 standing that fell under 2 categories. One was we alleged informational injury, which basically the argument was the groups are denied information to which they're entitled to under the statute because Ringling Brothers is engaging in these illegal practices without applying for the permit that it must apply for to engage in any activity that constitutes the take of an endangered species. And because they weren't applying for that permit, which in turn would have provided the groups with all kinds of information that is prescribed by the statute and regulations, the groups were suffering informational injury. In addition, the groups also argued that they were suffering an injury because of the drain on their resources, because they had to spend a lot of money and time trying to explain to the public what really goes on behind the scenes at the circus. And this is what they had to spend their time and resources on because Ringling Brothers was engaged in these activities and the public needed to know the truth, and therefore, and Ringling Brothers was spending $1 zillion on public relations denying that they engaged in any of these practices. And so the groups asserted that they had this kind of resource injury, which was established, the famous case on that score is Havens Realty versus Coleman, which is a 1982 case, which involved racial steering practices. So those were the arguments for standing. The case was originally filed in the year 2000. I was a much younger woman back then. And we put on an incredible case. We had an amazing case. I don't have time to go through it now. I'll give you some of the highlights. We had a 7-week trial. We had some of the world's leading experts on elephants as our expert witnesses. They were fantastic. We had all kinds of evidence of abuse of these practices that took place behind the scenes. I think I've got a clip, my next clip is some of the bullhead evidence we showed. And again, these are snippets, just snippets. Oh, yeah. So, get my cursor on the guy. There we go. And help from the audience. Did you see that? Trimester? He hit the elephant. That's a young elephant. This is a photo shoot with Ken Feld. got this in Discovery. This is something this is something that happened during the trial. Hitting the elephants to get ready to go on stage. Just random hitting of the elephants. They're not doing anything wrong, they're just being told who's boss. So that's what goes on. In addition to that, I mean, I will just again, these are snippets of what was established, and I'm going to tell you some of the things that came out of the mouths of Ringling Brothers themselves. Ken Feld, who's the CEO, admitted on cross-examination that all of his elephant handlers strike the elephants with bull hooks. This is after years of denying this, that we were all making this up. He admitted on a cross-examination that all of the handlers strike elephants with bull hooks. Robert Ridley, who's one of their veteran elephant handlers, testified that he sees puncture wounds on the elephants caused by bull hooks 3 to 4 times a month. And they also testified that he sees what are called hook boils, which are infections caused by bull hooks, on average of twice a week on the elephants, and that they're very common. One internal memo reported that an elephant had 22 puncture wounds from hooks. This is an internal memo we got in Discovery. Another internal memo that Catherine mentioned that we got in Discovery from Ringling Brothers' own animal behaviorist. I have to read you what she said because it's unbelievable. This is a memo that she wrote to Ken Feld. Last night in the show, I observed Isham, one of the handlers, hook Lutzi, one of the elephants, under the trunk 3 times and behind the leg once in an attempt to line her up for the T-mount. After the act, I stopped backstage and observed blood in small pools and dripped along the length of the rubber and all the way inside the barn. And then she goes on to say, we had an elephant dripping blood all over the arena floor during the show from being hooked. What's interesting about this memo, and it was an admitted piece of evidence, is that the whole purpose of this memo was not to report, oh my God, the elephants are being hit with bullets and bleeding all over the. The purpose of this memo that she wrote was to rein in the handler that was responsible for it because he was letting it happen in public. That was the problem. It was happening in a place where the public could see it and they were asking questions about it. And that's what she was concerned about. It would look bad for the company and she wanted something done about that. In another internal, and these internal memos that we got, I just have to say, it took us 2 years to get them because we had to move to compel all the medical records for the elephants, which Ringling Brothers refused to give us for 2 years. They hid the medical records, basically. But you get 2 judge orders compelling them to give us the records. And when we got them, this is the kind of stuff that we got. These are emails from a vet tech, from the new vet tech to her superiors. She's new on the job. She reports in an email, after this morning's baths, at least 4 of the elephants came in with multiple abrasions and lacerations from the hooks. The lacerations were very visible, and I had questions at the open house from 2 members of the public about what were they from. Jimmy applied Wonder Dust to the wounds just before the show. So this is the kind of thing that we were able to get in Discovery. Here's another internal memo from their behaviorist, again complaining about a handler to her superior. She says, Troy Metzler was observed hitting Angelica, a young elephant, 3 to 4 times in the stocks, that means on the train, before unloading her and then using a hand electric prod within public view after unloading. Again, the concern is the public could see it. Not the method, but the public could see it. Troy carried an electric prod in his back pocket throughout most of the California tour during the walk-ins. Illegal in the state of California to use an electric prod. So we had a lot of bullhook evidence. We also had, in addition to Mr. Ryder, we had 5 other former Ringling Brothers employees who testified at the trial, either through deposition or through actually coming to the trial and testifying in person. Yep, this is what happens. This is what goes on every day. They're beaten with bullhooks. We had these ex-employees had seen some particularly horrific beatings of elephants because they had not performed properly, because they were causing a ruckus. One elephant was beaten horribly because it defecated during the middle of a show, which is a no-no. And in fact, the testimony that came out at the trial, Ringling Brothers employees admitted that one of the things they do is they force the elephants to defecate on command so that they can empty them out before they go out and do the show, because they don't want to have an elephant. Heaven forbid if a wild animal actually pooped in the middle of a show and people saw that elephants poop. I mean, we can't have that, so it would be just too dirty and too messy. So they train them on command with use of bullhooks to defecate on command so that that doesn't happen. This elephant, in this particular instance, had an accident and was severely beaten afterwards, according to the testimony of another former Ringling Brothers employee. So on the chaining evidence, there was tons of chaining evidence. They are, as Catherine mentioned, these elephants basically are stored on a train when they're moving from one venue to another. They are put on a very narrow train car next to each other. At least 2 of their legs are chained. They can barely move. They are there for many, many hours. This is undercover video of the elephants in the trains, so you can see how narrow the train car is. That elephant is engaging in classic stereotypic behavior, which Catherine talked about. I think you saw the chains on their legs. And because, as Catherine mentioned, the Ringling Brothers Circus travels 48 weeks out of every year, this is pretty much their life. This is what they do. The performance itself, when they actually go to the circus and perform, is a 9-minute long performance. So the life that I'm describing here and that Catherine has talked about is what goes into making a 9-minute performance for an audience. We got these wonderful documents in Discovery. We got boxes and boxes of them. We didn't know what they were at first, but when we figured out what they were, we got very excited. What these are they're called transportation orders, and it's basically the negotiations that goes on between Ringling Brothers and the train companies. They have to get permission to use the train tracks from the train companies, from the railroad companies. And to do that, they have to have these very detailed documents that explain when they're going to be on the train, when they go from one venue to another. And to make a very long story short, when we got their 30B6 witness, when I deposed him, so he's the designated official for Ringling Brothers who can explain what this means to me, basically he explained that when you add it all up, you can tell how long they were on the train. You'd already established that when they're on the train, they're chained by 2 legs. And what you can also tell from these documents is not only how long are they on the train, but when do they get off the train, actually get off the train, get to move around a little bit. And the answer is they rarely get off the train. And we took all of these, and these were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these documents. And we analyzed them. We had a witness take the stand and explain what they all show, and they show that on average, the elephants are on these trains for more than 26 consecutive hours at a time when they're on the road. They're often on the road, often in the train cars for 60 to 70 hours or more, and sometimes as long as 90 to 100 hours. And they rarely get off the train. And Catherine also mentioned Gary Jacobson, who runs the breeding farm for the Ringling Brothers Circus down in Florida, the Center for Elephant Conservation it's called, admitted on the stand that the elephants down there are also chained for most of the day. I think I have a clip of that. This was taken at the court-ordered inspection to show you how they live down there. They're standing on a concrete floor, and they're chained in the back. And this is what they do. And they do this for about 18 hours a day. The male elephants never get to go out on the grass, ever. He testified to that. And these elephants, we had some experts at these, go to these court-ordered inspections, and the experts noticed that these elephants have been on these concrete floors and back and forth with this repetitive stereotypic behavior so often, they've actually worn grooves into the concrete. If you can imagine that, grooves in the concrete. Mr. Jacobson testified under oath that some of the elephants, and Catherine mentioned this, some of the elephants down there spend 22 and a half hours every single day on chains. There's only 24 hours in a day, so do the math. They basically live on chains. And we were able to show extensive evidence of stereotypic behavior. One of the elephants, on the first night of a court-ordered inspection, we went down to an actual, where a show was being held, and went backstage after the show was over, and immediately put them on chains and put them on their, in their small enclosures. And this is an elephant. This is the other thing you got to know. These elephants live long lives. Their lives are comparable to human lives. They live to be 60, 70, as old as 80 in the wild. And so they live a long time. So when Ringling Brothers gets them as babies, they have them for many, many years. But this is the life they live every single day. And one of these elephants, an elephant named Karen, who was born in 1969, and she's been in the circus ever since. She was at the court-ordered inspection. As soon as they put her on those chains, she started that stereotypic behavior, which, as Catherine explained, is abnormal, repetitive behavior. That it's a marker. It's a marker. I mean, all experts will tell you it's a marker of adversity. It's an animal that's suffering. Yes?
Since we're almost out of time, can you explain why, with all this damning evidence, unless I missed it, how you lost the case?
Yeah, get to that. That's the next thing on my... Let me just finish the, show you some of the stereotypic behavior. Whoops. Yeah, this is, well, actually, here's an elephant engaged in classic stereotypic behavior. Joyce Poole, who was one of our experts and is one of the leading elephant experts in the world, said, as Catherine also mentioned, even though she'd seen 20,000 or more elephants in the wild, she's never seen an elephant engage in this activity. Never. And it's not just the old elephants that engage in this. It's the young ones, too. This is Sarah. She's only about 4. She's not moving. Sarah. All right. Let's go back this way. Oh, anyway. So what happened was, on December 30th, 2009, Judge Sullivan, who was the judge in our case, the trial ended in March of 2009. In December of 2009, he issued an opinion in which he said he decided that none of the plaintiffs had Article III standing to bring this case. They had not shown, they had not proven that that the plaintiffs themselves were injured by what is going on here. And therefore, he did not have jurisdiction to resolve the case on the merits. And so he did not reach the merits. He decided that he did not believe that Mr. Ryder cared about the elephants. He thought that Mr. Ryder was making up his love of the elephants. He did not agree with either of the standing theories that we had made on behalf of the organizations. And so he held there was no standing. And unfortunately, particularly when you have a lot of credibility determinations made by the district court judge, which we had here, particularly about Mr. Ryder, it becomes very hard to appeal that decision. We did try to appeal the decision. On Mr. Ryder's standing, the Court of Appeals basically said we can't overturn the credibility determinations of the trial judge, so that wasn't going anywhere. On the organizational standing, the D.C. Circuit did not agree with our informational injury. It did say that our resource drain injury that was pled under Havens Realty line of cases was a legitimate standing theory, but held that we had failed to actually prove one little link in the chain, which is that the public is, in fact, under the misimpression when it sees the use of the bull hooks and it sees the use of the chains, that it is under the misimpression that those practices are either legal or humane. And that's why the organizations have to spend money disabusing them of that misimpression. And they mentioned that perhaps if we had put on an expert witness who could explain that, that might have met our burden of proof. But we have failed to meet our burden of proof. By the way, that argument that the D.C. Circuit came up with was not the basis upon which Judge Sullivan found that the organizations did not have standing, and was not the basis upon which Feld Entertainment for 9 years argued that we didn't have standing. It was a new theory for why we didn't have standing that was first made, articulated by the D.C. Circuit. So that's why, despite all the wonderful evidence we had, and this was a really, really strong case, and a lot of time and energy and a lot of our lives were dedicated to this case because we really cared about doing something about this problem. We're not able to succeed on the merits because of the standing issue. On the other hand, I think that the evidence that was produced at the trial has been very helpful to others who've been advocating in other forums for elephants. In the sort of immediate wake of the trial, the USDA, for the first time in its history, actually brought an enforcement action against Ringling Brothers and levied a fine of $270,000, which is huge for the USDA. It's nothing for Ringling Brothers. Unfortunately, Ken Feld testified at trial that they make $100 million a year just on the circus. So the $270,000 fine for them was a true slap in the face. But I think, as Catherine also mentioned, the exposure of what goes on behind the scenes has made ticket sales go down, has made people go to different venues for entertainment, circuses without animals, and other things. I did want to mention one other case, just take a second, just so you have some idea of some of the other things that are going on right now in these areas. There's a case right now that's pending in the Northern District of California involving an orca, a killer whale, who some of you may have heard of. Her name is Lolita. She was taken out of the wild in the 1970s off the coast of Washington, and she was put in the Miami Seaquarium, which is a for-profit aquarium down in Miami, and she's been there ever since, and she's in a tank that is a small substandard tank. It's even smaller than the Animal Welfare Act standards that apply to it. She is being kept without any companions of her own species, which is also a violation of the Animal Welfare Act, and she's being kept exposed to very hot infrared rays of the Miami sun, which is also a violation of the Animal Welfare Act standards. And what we've done in that case, and this is a coalition of individuals and groups who care about this animal, is we submitted a very lengthy submission to the USDA back in February with not only all kinds of evidence, but expert affidavits from orca experts, zoo design experts, making the case that the Seaquarium is in flagrant violation of Animal Welfare Act standards, and therefore, and now this is important because this is a test case, because as I told you earlier, there's no private right of action under the Animal Welfare Act. What we're doing in this case is with this submission, this evidentiary submission, we asked the USDA not to renew the license for the seaquarium. And which of course the USDA ignored our submission and did renew the license of the seaquarium. But now what we've done is challenge that license decision, which is a classic challenge under the Administrative Procedure Act. You can bring a challenge to an agency's final agency action as being arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law. And so that is what we've done. And that is a case that we very recently filed in California, and stay tuned to see what happens with that case. I'm sorry there's no more time for questions.
I think we have a little cocktail reception outside for everybody, and if people have questions of our speakers, they can come up privately and ask them.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.